It was a beautiful Tuesday morning when Victoria Ashford sat in her luxurious penthouse office, sipping her third espresso of the day. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow on her expensive furniture. She was supposed to be reviewing the guest list for her annual summer garden party, but her mind kept wandering. This year's party had to be different, more memorable, something people would talk about for months. Victoria was known throughout the city as the woman who threw the most extravagant parties. Her events were legendary. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, live orchestras, and guest lists that read like a who's who of the city's elite. But lately, she felt like her parties were becoming predictable. Everyone expected the same old luxury, the same boring conversations about stock markets and vacation homes. She needed something new, something shocking. As she stared out the window, lost in thought, she noticed someone moving in the hallway outside her office. It was Robert Chen, the janitor who cleaned the building every evening. He was pushing his cleaning cart, his uniform slightly wrinkled, his face showing the tiredness of someone who had worked long hours. Victoria had seen him countless times over the past 5 years, but she had never really paid attention to him. He was just part of the background, like the paintings on the wall or the plants in the lobby. But today, a thought struck her. A wickedly amusing thought that made her smile spread slowly across her face. What if she invited him to her party? The idea was so ridiculous, so unexpected, that it actually made her laugh out loud. Can you imagine? A janitor at a black tie event surrounded by millionaires and business tycoons? The man probably didn't even own a proper suit. He would show up in his work clothes completely out of place, and her guests would be utterly shocked. The more she thought about it, the more hilarious it seemed. It would be like bringing a fish to a desert. Everyone would be talking about it. Her friends would think she was being bold and unpredictable. Some might even think she was being charitable, inviting someone from a different social class. But deep down, Victoria knew the truth. This wasn't about kindness. This was about entertainment. This was about having something interesting to gossip about over their expensive wine. She immediately called her assistant, Lauren, into her office. Lauren was a young woman in her late 20s, always eager to please, always ready with a smile and a notepad. When she walked in, Victoria was practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. "Lauren, I need you to do something for me," Victoria said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I want you to send a formal invitation to the janitor." "Yes, the one who cleans this building. Robert something. Find out his full name and address." Lauren's face showed complete confusion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford, did you say the janitor?" "Yes, the janitor," Victoria repeated, barely containing her laughter. "Send him a proper invitation. Make it official. Black tie event, the whole thing. I want him to receive it just like everyone else." Lauren hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure if this was some kind of joke. But when she saw the serious expression on Victoria's face, she nodded and left the office. Victoria could hardly contain her excitement. She immediately picked up her phone and started calling her closest friends. First, she called Patricia Montgomery, her best friend since college. Patricia was married to a hedge fund manager and lived in an even bigger mansion than Victoria. When Patricia answered, Victoria could hear the sound of her tennis instructor in the background. "Patricia, darling, you won't believe what I just did," Victoria said, her voice filled with glee. "What is it? Did you finally buy that villa in the south of France? Better than that. I just invited the janitor from my office building to the summer party." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by an explosion of laughter. "You did not." "Victoria, that's absolutely insane." "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking it would be the most entertaining thing we've seen in years. Can you imagine his face when he walks into the party? Can you imagine what everyone else will think?" Patricia was still laughing. "This is either brilliant or completely crazy. I can't wait to see what happens. Does he even know how to behave at a formal event?" "That's exactly the point," Victoria said. "He probably doesn't. It's going to be priceless." She made similar calls to 3 more of her friends. Each reaction was the same. Initial shock, followed by laughter, followed by excited anticipation. Everyone thought it was the funniest thing they had heard in months. Some of them even started placing bets on what the janitor would wear. Would he show up in his uniform? Would he wear some cheap suit from a discount store? Would he even show up at all? 2 days later, Lauren delivered the news that the invitation had been hand-delivered to Robert's apartment. Victoria felt a thrill of excitement run through her. The trap was set. Now all she had to do was wait and see if he would take the bait. Part of her hoped he wouldn't show up. Part of her hoped he would decline the invitation, saving himself the embarrassment. But another part of her, the part that was already planning the seating arrangements and imagining the shocked faces of her guests, desperately wanted him to come. She started telling more people about her social experiment, as she liked to call it. At her weekly lunch with the ladies from her charity foundation, she casually mentioned it over salads that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. At her yoga class with other wealthy housewives, she brought it up during the cool-down stretches. Everyone had the same reaction. They thought it was bold, daring, and absolutely hilarious. Victoria spent the next few days planning the party with renewed enthusiasm. She chose the most elegant decorations, hired the best catering company in the city, and even arranged for a string quartet to play during dinner. But in the back of her mind, everything was building up to one moment. The moment when Robert would walk through her front door and everyone would see him for what he was. An ordinary janitor, out of place, out of his depth, a living, breathing joke at her expensive party. She never once stopped to think about how he might feel. She never considered that he was a real person with real feelings, with a life and struggles she knew nothing about. To Victoria, he was just a prop in her elaborate show. A way to make her party memorable. A way to prove that she was still the most interesting, most daring hostess in the city. As the days passed and the party drew closer, Victoria's excitement grew. She had no idea that her cruel little joke was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. She had no idea that the man she saw as nothing more than a janitor was about to teach her the most important lesson of her life. And she certainly had no idea that this party, the one she planned so carefully to entertain her friends, would end up being remembered for entirely different reasons than she expected. The invitation was sent. The stage was set, and Victoria Ashford was about to discover that you should never judge a person by the work they do, or the clothes they wear. Robert Chen had just finished his evening shift at the office building. His back ached from mopping floors, his hands were rough from scrubbing, and his feet were tired from walking up and down the stairs all day. At 55 years old, the work was getting harder, but he never complained. This job put food on the table and kept a roof over his head. That was enough. He took the bus home like he did every evening. The ride took 40 minutes, passing through different neighborhoods. From the wealthy business district where he worked to the modest working-class area where he lived. He watched the city lights blur past the window, thinking about what to make for dinner. Maybe some rice and vegetables. Simple and cheap. When he finally reached his small apartment building, he climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, his knees protesting with each step. The building was old but clean. He made sure to keep his own hallway spotless. Just because he cleaned other people's buildings didn't mean he would let his own home fall into disrepair. As he approached his door, he noticed something unusual. A cream-colored envelope was tucked under his doormat. It looked expensive, the kind of paper that felt heavy and important. Robert picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. His name was written in beautiful calligraphy. Robert Chen. Nobody ever wrote his name like that. Inside his apartment, he set down his work bag and opened the envelope slowly. What he found inside made him read it 3 times, convinced he was making a mistake. It was an invitation to Mrs. Victoria Ashford's annual summer garden party. Black tie event. Formal dress required. Press VP by Friday. Robert sat down heavily on his worn couch, still holding the invitation. Why would Mrs. Ashford invite him to her party? He had worked in her building for 5 years, cleaning her office every evening. She had never spoken to him, not once. She walked past him like he was invisible, like he was just another piece of furniture in the hallway. He was still staring at the invitation when he heard a knock on his door. It was his daughter, Lisa. She was 23 years old, fresh out of college, and the pride of his life. She worked as a junior accountant at a small firm downtown. She visited him every Tuesday evening after work, bringing groceries and spending time with her father. "Dad, you left your door unlocked again," she said as she walked in, carrying 2 bags of groceries. Then she saw his face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Robert handed her the invitation without saying a word. Lisa read it quickly, her expression changing from curiosity to confusion to anger in just a few seconds. This is from that woman you work for, Mrs. Ashford? She's not my boss exactly, Robert said quietly. I just clean her building. But yes, it's from her. Lisa read the invitation again more carefully this time. Then she looked at her father with concern in her eyes. Dad, this feels wrong. Why would she invite you to something like this? She's never even acknowledged your existence before. Maybe she's just being kind, Robert suggested, though he didn't quite believe it himself. Kind? Lisa shook her head. Dad, rich people don't suddenly become kind to their janitors. I think this is some kind of joke. I think she wants to embarrass you in front of her rich friends. It's like a game to them. Robert looked at the invitation again. His daughter was probably right. He had worked for wealthy people long enough to know how they thought. To them, he was invisible. He was the man who emptied their trash cans and mopped their floors. They never saw him as a real person with feelings and dignity. You're not going, are you? Lisa asked, her voice filled with worry. Robert was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his life, about all the years of hard work, about the way people like Victoria treated him. He thought about respect and dignity, about being seen and being invisible. Actually, he said slowly, I think I will go. What? Dad, no, she's trying to humiliate you. Maybe, Robert admitted. But maybe this is also an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To be laughed at by a room full of rich people? Robert stood up and walked to his small bookshelf. Among the handful of books he owned, he pulled out an old photo album. He opened it carefully and showed Lisa a picture. It was a younger version of her father, dressed in an expensive suit, standing in front of a large office building. He was smiling, confident, surrounded by other men in suits. Dad, who is this? Lisa had seen the photo before but never really asked about it. That's me, 22 years ago. Before you were born. Before everything changed. Lisa looked at her father with new eyes. She realized there was so much about his past that he never talked about. Tell me, she said softly. Robert sat back down and began to speak. His voice was steady but filled with old memories. I wasn't always a janitor, Lisa. A long time ago, I was an architect. I had my own firm, small but successful. I designed buildings, worked with important clients, made good money. Your mother and I were planning our future. We were happy. What happened? Lisa asked, though she could guess part of the answer. Your mother got sick. Very sick. The treatments were expensive. So expensive that insurance wouldn't cover everything. I sold my business to pay for her care. I sold our house. I sold everything we owned. But it wasn't enough. She died anyway, and I was left with nothing but debt and you. A 3-year-old daughter who needed her father. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. She knew her mother had died when she was young, but her father never talked about how hard those times were. I took the first job I could find that offered stability and health insurance. It was a janitorial position. People looked down on me. My old friends stopped calling. But I didn't care. I had you to raise. I had bills to pay. I had a daughter who needed food and clothes and education. That was all that mattered. Dad, I never knew, Lisa whispered. I never wanted you to know how much I sacrificed. I wanted you to focus on your studies, on building your own future. And look at you now, college graduate. Good job, no debt. I'm so proud of you, Lisa. They sat together in silence for a while, processing everything. Finally, Lisa spoke. So why do you want to go to this party? To prove something to Mrs. Ashford? No, Robert said firmly. Not to her, to myself. For 20 years, I've let people like her make me feel invisible. I've accepted being treated as less than human. But I'm not less than anyone. I may be a janitor now, but I'm still the same man I was before. I have the same intelligence, the same dignity, the same worth, and maybe it's time I reminded myself of that. Lisa looked at her father with a mixture of pride and worry. But what will you wear? It says black tie. That means a tuxedo. Robert smiled for the first time that evening. I still have my old tuxedo, from my architect days. It's in storage, but it should still fit. Quality clothes last forever. And what if she really is planning to humiliate you? What if her friends laugh at you? Then they laugh, Robert said calmly. But I'll be there with my head held high, treating everyone with respect and dignity. I'll show them that a man's worth isn't measured by his job title or his bank account. It's measured by his character. Lisa thought about it for a moment, then slowly nodded. Okay, if you're really going to do this, then I'm going to help you. We're going to make sure you walk into that party looking absolutely amazing. We're going to show Mrs. Ashford that she picked the wrong person to mess with. Over the next hour, they made plans. They would retrieve the tuxedo from storage and have it cleaned. Lisa would help him practice conversation topics so he could hold his own with the wealthy guests. They would prepare him to face whatever challenges awaited at that party. As Lisa left that evening, she hugged her father tightly. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Not just for going to this party, but for everything you've done for me. You're the strongest person I know." After she left, Robert sat alone in his apartment, still holding the invitation. He knew this could end badly. He knew Victoria probably had cruel intentions, but something inside him had awakened. For too long he had accepted being invisible, being looked down upon, being treated as less than human. Not anymore. This party was going to be interesting indeed. Victoria Ashford thought she was setting up a joke at his expense. What she didn't know was that Robert Chen was about to remind her, and everyone else at that party, that every person deserves respect. Every person has a story, and you should never underestimate someone just because of the work they do. He placed the invitation on his small dining table and smiled. "Game on, Mrs. Ashford, game on." The next morning, Robert woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft orange light through his small apartment window. He made himself a cup of instant coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. His mind was filled with memories he had buried for 20 years. He remembered the day he graduated from architecture school. He was 28 years old, full of dreams and ambition. His parents had worked multiple jobs to send him to university. They were immigrants who believed education was the key to a better life. When he walked across that stage and received his degree, his mother cried tears of joy. His father, a man who rarely showed emotion, had hugged him tightly and whispered, "You made it, son. You really made it." 3 years after graduation, Robert opened his own small architecture firm. It was just him and 2 other architects working out of a tiny office. But they were good, really good. Robert had a natural talent for understanding space and design. He could look at an empty lot and see a beautiful building in his mind. His designs were practical but elegant, affordable but stylish. Word spread quickly in the community. Local businesses started hiring him to design their offices. A few wealthy families asked him to design their homes. Nothing huge or famous, but steady work that paid well. By the time he was 33, his firm had 10 employees and a reputation for quality work at fair prices. That was also the year he met Helen. She worked as a librarian in the downtown library. Robert had gone there to research historical architecture for a project. He needed some old books about classical building designs. Helen helped him find exactly what he needed, and they talked for 2 hours about art, buildings, and life. He asked her out for coffee the next day. 6 months later, they were married. Their life together was simple but happy. They rented a small house with a garden. Helen continued working at the library because she loved books. Robert continued growing his business. They talked about having children, about buying a bigger house someday, about growing old together. The future looked bright and full of possibilities. When Helen got pregnant with Lisa, they were overjoyed. Robert worked extra hours to save money for the baby. They painted the nursery together, choosing soft yellow walls because they wanted to be surprised about the baby's gender. Helen would sit in the rocking chair they bought at a second-hand store, her hand on her belly, talking to their unborn child about all the wonderful things they would do together. Lisa was born on a rainy Tuesday in April. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, tiny toes, a small button nose. Robert held her in the hospital and made a silent promise that he would give her the best life possible. He would work hard, provide for his family, and make sure his daughter had every opportunity to succeed. The first 2 years of Lisa's life were magical. Robert's business continued to grow. They finally saved enough money to buy their own house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was theirs. 3 bedrooms, a backyard where Lisa could play, a garage where Robert kept his drafting table for when inspiration struck late at night. Helen had a whole room just for her books. They were living the dream they had talked about on their first coffee date. Then everything fell apart. Helen started feeling tired all the time. At first they thought it was just stress from taking care of a toddler, but the tiredness got worse. She would fall asleep in the middle of the day. She lost her appetite. Dark circles appeared under her eyes no matter how much she rested. Robert convinced her to see a doctor. Then another doctor, then a specialist. Each appointment brought more questions than answers. Finally, after weeks of tests, they received the diagnosis: advanced cancer. Aggressive and fast-spreading. The doctor's face was grave as he explained the treatment options: chemotherapy, radiation, possibly surgery, and the costs. Insurance would cover some of it, but not nearly enough. The specific treatment Helen needed was considered experimental. It cost thousands of dollars per session, and she would need many sessions. Robert did the math. Even with insurance, they were looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. He didn't hesitate. He immediately started liquidating everything. First, he took out a second mortgage on their house. Then he sold his share of the architecture firm to his partners for much less than it was worth because he needed cash quickly. He sold their car and bought a cheap used one. He sold his expensive drafting equipment, his professional camera he used for project documentation, even Helen's engagement ring to pay for another round of treatment. Helen protested weakly from her hospital bed. "Robert, you're destroying everything we built. Stop, please, just stop." But he couldn't stop. Every morning he would drop 3-year-old Lisa at his mother's house, then go to the hospital to be with Helen. Every evening he would pick up Lisa, take her home, feed her dinner, put her to bed, and then work whatever job he could find to bring in extra money. He delivered newspapers at night. He did landscaping on weekends. He tutored students in math and design. Every dollar went to Helen's treatment. For 18 months they fought. Helen went through chemotherapy that made her hair fall out and left her weak and nauseous. She endured radiation that burned her skin. She had surgery that left scars across her chest. And through it all, she tried to smile for little Lisa, tried to pretend everything was okay, tried to be the mother her daughter deserved. Robert watched his wife slowly fade away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. No amount of money could save her. No amount of prayer could change the outcome. The cancer was stronger than their love, stronger than their hope, stronger than their determination. Helen died on a cold December morning, 2 days before Lisa's 4th birthday. Robert was holding her hand when she took her last breath. Her final words were, "Take care of our baby. Promise me you'll take care of Lisa." "I promise," he whispered through his tears. "I promise." The funeral was small. Robert had no money left for anything elaborate. Some old friends came, some family members, but many people who used to be part of their lives were noticeably absent. Robert's former business partners sent a card but didn't attend. Wealthy clients he used to design buildings for didn't show up. He realized that when you have money, you have friends. When you lose everything, you discover who actually cares about you. After the funeral, reality hit hard. Robert was alone with a 4-year-old daughter. He had no business, no savings, and debts that would take years to pay off. The house they bought with such pride was gone, taken by the bank. His mother let them stay in her small apartment temporarily, but Robert knew he needed to find work immediately. He applied for architecture positions, but without his own firm and with a gap in his resume, nobody would hire him. He was seen as washed up, too old, no longer relevant in the field. One interviewer actually told him, "You're not hungry enough anymore. We need people who will dedicate their lives to this work." Robert wanted to laugh at the irony. He had dedicated everything to his work, and it meant nothing now. Finally, desperate and running out of money, he saw an ad for a janitorial position at a commercial office building. The pay was low, but it offered health insurance and stable hours. He could drop Lisa at daycare, work his shift, and pick her up in the evening. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. He took the job. The first day was humbling. He wore a uniform with his name embroidered on it. He pushed a cleaning cart through the same kind of office buildings he used to design. He mopped floors in boardrooms where important decisions were made. He emptied trash cans filled with papers about deals worth more money than he would earn in a lifetime. Some of his old acquaintances saw him. A few pretended not to recognize him. Others looked at him with pity or disgust. One former client walked right past him, then did a double take. "Robert, is that really you? What happened to you? What happened to me?" Robert thought. Life happened. Love happened. Loss happened. Survival happened, but he didn't say any of that. He just smiled politely and said, "Just working like everyone else." Years passed. Robert threw himself into 2 things: his work and raising Lisa. He attended every parent-teacher conference. He helped with homework every night, even when he was exhausted from work. He saved every penny he could for her future education. He taught her the value of hard work, honesty, and treating everyone with respect. Lisa grew up watching her father clean other people's buildings with dignity. She saw him come home tired but never complaining. She learned that there is no shame in honest work no matter what that work is. Her father taught her that a person's character is what matters, not their job title or bank account. When Lisa got accepted to college, Robert cried tears of joy. His daughter was going to have the opportunities he lost. She was going to build a good life. All his sacrifices were worth it. Now sitting in his apartment 20 years after Helen's death, Robert thought about Victoria's invitation. This woman saw him as nothing but a janitor, a joke, entertainment for her rich friends. She had no idea about his past, his sacrifices, his losses, his quiet dignity, and that was fine.
He didn't need her to know his story.
He didn't need her approval or respect. But he was going to that party, and he was going to show her something important, that every person you meet has a story. Every person has fought battles you know nothing about. Saturday morning came bright and early. Lisa arrived at her father's apartment at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying a large bag and wearing a determined expression. She had taken the day off work specifically to help her father prepare for Victoria's party, which was scheduled for the following evening. "Okay, Dad," she announced as she walked in. "Today we're going to make sure you look absolutely incredible. Mrs. Ashford thinks she's inviting a simple janitor to embarrass him. She has no idea what's coming." Robert smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Lisa, I appreciate this, but let's not get carried away. I'm just going to be myself." "Exactly," Lisa said firmly. "You're going to be yourself. Your real self. The man you were, the man you still are. Not the invisible janitor these people walk past every day." Their first stop was the storage facility across town. Robert had been renting a small unit there for years. It contained boxes of his old life, things he couldn't bear to throw away but didn't have room to keep in his small apartment. Photo albums, some books, a few pieces of furniture, and most importantly, his old wardrobe from his architecture days. The storage unit was dusty and dim. They had to move several boxes to reach the garment bag hanging in the back. When Robert unzipped it, Lisa gasped. Inside was a beautiful black tuxedo, perfectly preserved in protective covering. The fabric was high-quality wool. The cut was classic and timeless. It was the kind of tuxedo that cost a month's salary back when Robert bought it. "Dad, this is gorgeous," Lisa breathed, running her hand over the fabric carefully. "When did you buy this?" "About 25 years ago," Robert said, his voice full of memories. "I needed it for a big award ceremony. My firm had won an award for one of our designs. Your mother helped me pick it out. She said I looked handsome in it." "You're going to look handsome again," Lisa assured him. "Let's get this cleaned and pressed. There's a good tailor shop near my apartment." They carefully transported the tuxedo to Lee's Tailoring, a small shop run by an elderly Korean man who had been in business for 40 years. Mr. Lee examined the tuxedo with the practiced eye of a true craftsman. "This is excellent quality," he said approvingly. "They don't make suits like this anymore. Good fabric, good stitching, classic style." "Who made this?" "A small boutique tailor. They went out of business years ago," Robert answered. Mr. Lee nodded. "Give me 2 hours. I'll clean it, press it, and make any small adjustments if needed." "You're lucky. Classic styles never go out of fashion." While they waited for the tuxedo, Lisa took her father shopping. Not for new clothes, but for the small details that would complete his look. They went to a department store and carefully selected dress socks, a new bow tie, and shoe polish for his old dress shoes, which were also stored in the unit. "Dad, when's the last time you had a proper haircut?" Lisa asked as they walked through the mall. Robert ran his hand through his gray hair self-consciously. "I usually just trim it myself to save money." "Not today," Lisa declared. She led him to an upscale barbershop that she had researched online, the kind of place that offered hot towel shaves and shoulder massages along with haircuts. The barber, a friendly man named Tony, studied Robert's face thoughtfully. "You have good bone structure," he observed. "Strong jaw, distinguished features. With the right cut, you're going to look very sharp." For the next hour, Robert sat in the comfortable leather chair while Tony worked his magic. The haircut was precise and professional, trimming away the uneven edges and styling his gray hair in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. Tony even trimmed and shaped Robert's beard, which he usually kept simple and functional. When Tony finally spun the chair around so Robert could see himself in the mirror, both he and Lisa were stunned. The man staring back looked confident, refined, and yes, handsome. The gray in his hair and beard didn't make him look old. It made him look experienced, wise, dignified. "Dad," Lisa whispered, her eyes getting misty. "You look amazing." Robert studied his reflection, hardly recognizing himself. He hadn't paid this much attention to his appearance in 20 years. He had gotten so used to being invisible that he forgot what it felt like to actually be seen. They returned to Mr. Lee's shop to pick up the tuxedo. It looked brand new. The fabric had been carefully steamed, removing any wrinkles or creases. The black color was deep and rich. Mr. Lee had even sewn on new buttons to replace the original ones that had slightly tarnished over time. "Try it on," Mr. Lee insisted. "Let's make sure it fits properly." Robert went into the fitting room and carefully put on the tuxedo. The pants fit perfectly. The jacket slid onto his shoulders like it was made for him, which of course it had been all those years ago. He had maintained his build over the years, staying lean and strong from his physical work. When he stepped out of the fitting room, both Lisa and Mr. Lee smiled with satisfaction. "Perfect," Mr. Lee pronounced. "You look like you stepped out of a classic movie." Back at Robert's apartment, Lisa wasn't done yet. She had brought her laptop and had prepared a different kind of help. "Okay, Dad," she said, opening her computer. "Now we need to make sure you can hold conversations with these wealthy people. They're going to talk about current events, business trends, maybe art and culture. You need to be prepared." "Lisa, I read the newspaper every day," Robert protested. "I'm not completely out of touch." "I know, but let's practice anyway. Pretend I'm one of Mrs. Ashford's wealthy friends. Start a conversation with me." What followed was 2 hours of practice conversations. Lisa would play different roles: a businesswoman, a lawyer, a doctor, an investor. Robert would engage in conversation, discussing everything from recent news stories to economic trends to environmental issues. Lisa was impressed by how much her father actually knew about the world. He might work as a janitor, but his mind was sharp and his knowledge was broad. "You read a lot, don't you?" Lisa asked during a break. "I go to the library twice a week," Robert admitted. "Your mother loved libraries. I like to read there, feel close to her. Plus, it's free." They also discussed strategy, how Robert should carry himself, how to handle potentially awkward situations, what to do if someone asked what he did for a living. Lisa's advice was simple and direct. Tell the truth with pride. There was no shame in being a janitor. If someone looks down on you for your job, that says everything about them and nothing about you, Lisa said firmly. That evening, they went through Robert's old storage boxes and found something else, his portfolio from his architecture days. It was a large leather folder containing photographs and sketches of buildings he had designed. Robert hadn't looked at it in years. Opening it brought back a flood of memories. There was the small office building he designed for a local tech startup, the modern house he created for a young couple with a limited budget, the renovation plans for a historic theater downtown. Each project represented hours of work, creative problem-solving, and the satisfaction of seeing his ideas become reality. "Why don't you bring this to the party?" Lisa suggested. "No," Robert said immediately. "I'm not going there to prove myself or brag about my past. I'm going there to show them that every person deserves respect, regardless of their job. Bringing my portfolio would look like I'm ashamed of being a janitor." "I'm not," Lisa understood. Her father wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply going to show up as himself, a man with dignity, intelligence, and self-respect. A man who had lived through loss and hardship but never lost his humanity. The next day was Sunday, the day of the party. Robert spent the morning as he usually did, reading at the library, taking a walk in the park, preparing a simple lunch. He wanted to stay calm and centered. No nerves, no anxiety, just quiet confidence. In the afternoon, Lisa came over to help him get ready. She had even bought him a small boutonniere, a white rose for his lapel. "Every gentleman at a formal party should have one," she explained. As Robert dressed in his tuxedo, he felt a transformation happening. Not just in his appearance, but in how he felt about himself. For 20 years, he had accepted being invisible. He had lowered his gaze, kept quiet, tried not to take up too much space in the world. But standing there in his tuxedo looking at himself in the mirror, he remembered who he really was. He was Robert Chen. Father. Former architect. Survivor. A man who had loved deeply and lost everything. A man who had rebuilt his life from nothing, not for himself, but for his daughter. A man who worked with his hands but thought with a brilliant mind. A man who treated everyone with respect, from the CEO to the custodian. "You ready, Dad?" Lisa asked, straightening his bow tie one final time. "I'm ready," Robert answered. She called him a taxi because she wanted him to arrive in style, not on the bus. As the taxi pulled up to his building, Lisa hugged her father tightly. "Make them remember that every person matters," she whispered. "Show them what real class looks like." Robert kissed his daughter's forehead. "I'll make you proud." "You always do," she replied, tears in her eyes. As the taxi drove away, heading toward Victoria's mansion, Robert looked out the window at the city he had lived in his entire life. A city that had seen him rise and fall and rise again in a different way. Tonight wasn't about revenge or proving anything. It was simply about dignity, about reminding people that everyone has a story, everyone has value. The taxi pulled up to Victoria Ashford's estate just as the sun was beginning to set. Golden light bathed the massive mansion in a warm glow, making it look like something from a fairy tale. The house sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, with a circular driveway lined with luxury cars. Porsche, Mercedes, BMW, Tesla. Each one probably cost more than Robert made in 5 years. Robert paid the taxi driver and took a deep breath. Through the tall windows, he could see the party already in full swing. People in elegant dresses and expensive tuxedos mingled with champagne glasses in their hands. A string quartet played soft classical music in the background. Everything looked perfect, polished, and extremely expensive. A young man in a valet uniform approached Robert's taxi. He looked bored, probably expecting another entitled rich person to boss him around. But when Robert stepped out of the car, the valet's expression changed. His eyes widened slightly and he straightened his posture. "Good evening, sir," the valet said respectfully, actually meaning it. "Welcome to the Ashford residence." "Thank you," Robert replied with a warm smile. He had learned long ago that how you treat service workers says everything about your character. The valet, probably used to being ignored or treated rudely, seemed surprised by Robert's genuine kindness. As Robert walked toward the entrance, he could feel eyes on him. Some guests were arriving at the same time and they were studying him curiously. Who was this distinguished-looking gentleman? He didn't look familiar. Must be someone important, the women whispered to each other behind their hands. The men nodded politely, assuming he was probably a business associate they should know. Inside the mansion, the scene was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Fresh flowers in massive arrangements filled every corner. Waiters in crisp white uniforms carried trays of champagne and fancy appetizers that probably had French names Robert didn't know. The floor was polished marble that reflected the light like a mirror. Victoria stood near the entrance, greeting guests with air kisses and fake enthusiasm. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Robert's car, dripping with jewelry that sparkled under the lights. She was talking to Patricia Montgomery, her best friend, and both women were watching the entrance eagerly. "Where is he?" Patricia whispered to Victoria. "Do you think he'll actually show up?" "Oh, he'll show," Victoria replied confidently. "I had Lauren confirm the RSVP. This is going to be hilarious. I can't wait to see what he wears. Probably some cheap suit from a thrift store." Just then, Robert stepped through the grand entrance. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Every head in the room turned to look at the man who had just walked in. He was stunning. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, highlighting his lean, strong build. His gray hair was styled impeccably, making him look distinguished and sophisticated. His posture was straight and confident, but not arrogant. He moved with quiet grace, like someone who was completely comfortable in his own skin. The white rose on his lapel added the perfect finishing touch. Victoria's smile froze on her face. Her champagne glass slipped slightly in her hand and she had to grab it quickly to avoid dropping it. This was not what she expected. Not even close. She had expected an embarrassed janitor in ill-fitting clothes. Instead, walking through her door was a man who looked like he belonged in a high-end magazine advertisement. Is that the janitor?" Patricia whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Victoria couldn't speak. She just stared, her brain trying to process what she was seeing. Robert's eyes found Victoria across the room. He walked toward her calmly, not rushing, not hesitant. Just a man attending a party like any other guest. As he approached, other guests moved aside, still staring at him with curiosity and admiration. "Mrs. Ashford," Robert said politely, extending his hand. "Thank you for the invitation. Your home is beautiful." Victoria mechanically shook his hand, still in shock. Up close, she could see the quality of his tuxedo, the silver cufflinks at his wrists, the subtle scent of good cologne. This man looked like he had stepped out of an old Hollywood movie. Yes, thank you for coming," Victoria stammered, completely thrown off balance. This was supposed to be her joke, her entertainment. But looking at Robert now, she felt like she was the one being exposed. Other guests were already approaching, drawn to this intriguing stranger. An elderly woman in an emerald dress smiled at Robert warmly. "I don't believe we've met." "I'm Catherine Williams, Robert Chen," he replied, shaking her hand gently. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Chen? Are you related to the Chen family from the pharmaceutical company?" another guest asked. "No, different family," Robert answered easily, not bothered by the question. Victoria watched in growing horror as her guests surrounded Robert, introducing themselves, asking him questions, treating him like an honored guest rather than the joke she had intended him to be. None of them knew he was the janitor. They just saw a well-dressed, well-spoken gentleman and assumed he belonged there. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne. Robert took a glass and thanked the young man by name after reading his name tag. The waiter looked surprised and pleased that someone actually acknowledged him as a person. "So, Robert," Catherine Williams asked, "what brings you to Victoria's party? Are you in business?" Before Robert could answer, a loud voice interrupted. "I'll tell you what brings him here." Everyone turned to see Donald Fletcher, a real estate developer known for his ego and loud opinions. He had just arrived and spotted Robert immediately. "I know quality when I see it. That tuxedo is bespoke, probably Italian. And that confidence? This man is clearly successful. What industry are you in, Robert?" "Currently, I work in facility management," Robert replied smoothly. It wasn't a lie. He did manage cleaning facilities. He just didn't mention that he was the one doing the cleaning. "Facility management," Donald boomed. "Excellent field. Underappreciated but essential. You know, I own 15 commercial buildings, and the facility managers are the ones who really keep everything running smoothly." Robert smiled. "That's very true. Most people don't realize how important that work is." Victoria stood off to the side, watching this disaster unfold. Her friends were gathering around her, whispering urgently. "Victoria, who is this man?" Patricia demanded. "You said he was just a janitor." "He is," Victoria hissed back. "That's Robert Chen. He cleans my office building." "That man?" Another friend, Diana, looked shocked. "That can't be right." "Look at him. He looks like he owns the building, not cleans it." "I know what I'm doing," Victoria insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "Just wait. Someone will figure it out, and then everyone will see the joke." But as the evening progressed, the joke never materialized. Robert moved through the party with natural ease. He talked with business people about economic trends, showing surprising knowledge of market patterns. He discussed architecture with a city planner, making insightful comments about urban design. He spoke with an art collector about classical versus modern aesthetics, revealing a depth of knowledge that impressed everyone who spoke with him. A group of women found him charming and respectful. He complimented them genuinely, not flirtatiously. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to their answers with real interest. In a room full of men trying to impress each other with their wealth and status, Robert stood out simply by being kind and authentic. Donald Fletcher, the loud real estate developer, had taken a particular liking to Robert. "You know what I appreciate about you?" Donald said, loud enough for others to hear. "You actually listen when people talk. Most people at these parties are just waiting for their turn to speak, but you're different. Everyone has something interesting to say if you take the time to listen." Robert replied simply. Catherine Williams overheard this and nodded approvingly. "Wise words. Where did you say you worked, Robert?" "I work in the downtown business district," Robert answered, still not lying but not revealing the full truth either. Victoria was becoming desperate. Her big joke had completely backfired. Robert wasn't embarrassing himself. He was actually the most impressive person at her party. Guests who normally ignored her were asking her questions about him. "Victoria, darling, where did you meet Robert?" one guest asked. "You must introduce me properly. My company is looking for a new facilities consultant. He's the janitor," Victoria finally blurted out, her frustration getting the better of her. "He's the man who cleans my office building." "That's who he is." But the timing was terrible. She had said it too loudly during a lull in the music, and her words carried across the room. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Everyone looked at Victoria, then at Robert, then back at Victoria. The silence was deafening. Robert stood calmly, his champagne glass still in his hand, his expression unchanged. He didn't look embarrassed or ashamed. He simply looked at Victoria with quiet dignity, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the moment Victoria had been waiting for. The moment when everyone would laugh, when Robert would be exposed and humiliated, when her joke would finally pay off. But as she looked around the room, she didn't see people preparing to laugh. She saw confusion, discomfort, and slowly she saw disapproval. Her guests weren't looking at Robert with contempt. The silence that followed Victoria's announcement felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. The string quartet had stopped playing between songs, making her words echo through the entire room. Every guest stood frozen, processing what they had just heard. Robert remained calm, his posture unchanged. He took a small sip of his champagne and waited. He had known this moment would come eventually. There was no hiding who he was, and he had never intended to hide it. The truth would come out, and he was prepared for it. Donald Fletcher was the first to break the silence. The loud real estate developer looked from Victoria to Robert and back again. "Wait, you invited him as a joke?" His voice was loud, cutting through the tension. "You invited a hard-working man to your party just to humiliate him?" Victoria's face turned red. No, that's not. I just thought it would be interesting to—" "Interesting?" Catherine Williams interrupted, her elderly face showing clear disapproval. "Victoria, that's incredibly cruel." "But look at him," Victoria protested, gesturing at Robert desperately. "He's a janitor." "I just wanted to see what would happen if—" "If what?" Donald demanded. "If a working-class person attended your fancy party? And what exactly did you expect to happen? That we would all laugh at him? That we would treat him badly because of his job?" Victoria had no answer. The plan that seemed so clever and amusing a week ago now felt petty and mean-spirited under the judgmental gaze of her guests. Robert decided it was time to speak. He set down his champagne glass on a nearby table and addressed the room calmly. "Mrs. Ashford is correct. I am a janitor. I clean office buildings in the downtown district, including the building where Mrs. Ashford works. I have been doing this job for 20 years. I'm not ashamed of my work. It's honest labor that provides for my family." He paused, looking around the room at all the wealthy, successful people staring at him. "I suspected when I received the invitation that it might not have been extended with the kindest intentions. But I decided to come anyway, because I believe that every person deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their occupation. I also wanted to remind myself that my worth as a human being is not determined by my job title or my bank account." The room was completely silent. Some guests looked ashamed. Others looked thoughtful. A few were openly impressed by Robert's grace under pressure. Then Donald Fletcher did something unexpected. He started clapping, slowly at first, then louder. Within seconds, other guests joined in. Catherine Williams was clapping. The city planner Robert had spoken with was clapping. Even Patricia Montgomery, Victoria's best friend, was clapping awkwardly. Victoria stood alone in the center of her own party, the only one not applauding, feeling more isolated than she had ever felt in her life. Donald walked over to Robert and shook his hand firmly. "I apologize on behalf of everyone here for Victoria's behavior. You've shown more class in the last 5 minutes than most people show in a lifetime. No apology necessary," Robert said graciously. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." An attractive woman in her 40s approached Robert next. She introduced herself as Linda Morrison, owner of a successful interior design firm. "Robert, I couldn't help but overhear your earlier conversation about the architecture of this house. You mentioned that the conservatory had been modified from its original structure. How did you know that?" Robert smiled. "Training and observation. I used to work in architecture many years ago. Old habits die hard. When I see a building, I automatically analyze its structure and design. You were an architect? Linda's eyes widened with interest. Why didn't you mention that earlier? Because it's not who I am anymore, Robert explained. That was a different life. Circumstances changed and I had to adapt. Being a janitor is my present and I'm at peace with it. Donald jumped back into the conversation. What kind of architecture did you do? Commercial and residential? Small projects mostly. Office buildings, family homes, renovation plans. Nothing famous or groundbreaking, but good, solid work. The city planner Robert had spoken with earlier, a man named Gregory, rejoined the group. Wait, you designed buildings? Robert Chen. I feel like I've heard that name before. Did you have a firm here in the city? Chen Design Associates. We operated for about 8 years before I had to close it down. Gregory's face lit up with recognition. I knew it. You designed the Martinez building on 4th Street. I studied that building in one of my urban planning courses. The way you maximized natural light while maintaining privacy was brilliant. That building is still used as an example of efficient small-scale commercial design. Robert looked genuinely surprised. Really? I had no idea anyone remembered that project. Are you kidding? It's a great example of form meeting function on a limited budget. Gregory turned to the other guests. This man designed one of the most practical and beautiful small office buildings in our downtown area. More guests were gathering now, drawn by the animated conversation. Victoria stood on the outskirts of the growing crowd, watching her party slip completely out of her control. This was supposed to be about her showing off her cruel sense of humor. Instead, Robert had become the center of attention for all the right reasons. A young man in an expensive suit approached Robert hesitantly. Sir, can I ask you something? How did you go from being an architect to being a janitor? Robert finished the question for him. It's not a complicated story. My wife got sick, very sick. The treatments were expensive and they weren't covered by insurance. I sold everything I had, including my business, to pay for her care. She died anyway, and I was left with a young daughter to raise and no money. I took the first stable job I could find that offered health insurance. That job happened to be in janitorial services. The young man looked moved by the story. And you've been doing that for 20 years? Yes, and in those 20 years I raised my daughter. I made sure she got a good education. I taught her the value of hard work and treating everyone with respect. She graduated from college debt-free last year and now has a good job as an accountant. Every sacrifice I made was worth it. Catherine Williams had tears in her eyes. That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. You gave up everything for your family. Any parent would do the same, Robert said simply. Donald shook his head. No, not any parent. Many people would have given up. Many people would have become bitter. But you maintained your dignity and raised a good daughter. That takes strength most people don't have. Linda Morrison was studying Robert with professional interest. You know, Robert, someone with your eye for design and your life experience would be valuable in my industry. Have you ever thought about consulting? Honestly, no, Robert admitted. I've been focused on stability and providing for my daughter. Consulting sounds unpredictable. It can be, Linda agreed, but it can also be rewarding. You clearly haven't lost your knowledge or your eye for good design. That's not something that goes away just because you're not actively practicing. Gregory, the city planner, nodded enthusiastically. She's right. The Martinez building was designed 25 years ago, and it's still relevant. That kind of timeless design sense is rare. Donald Fletcher, never one to be left out of a business opportunity, added his voice. I own 15 commercial buildings like I mentioned earlier. I'm always looking for consultants who can help me with renovation projects. Someone who understands both the technical side and the practical side. Someone who knows that buildings aren't just structures, they're places where real people work and live. Robert was overwhelmed by the sudden attention and offers. I appreciate your kindness, but I have a job. I have responsibilities. Keep your job, Donald said immediately. I'm not asking you to quit. I'm asking if you'd be interested in some consulting work on the side. Part-time, flexible hours, good pay. You could use your expertise without giving up your stability. Other guests were now sharing their own stories. One man revealed that his father had been a factory worker who went to night school to become an engineer. A woman shared that her mother cleaned houses while studying to become a nurse. Another guest talked about working in a restaurant kitchen while building his first business. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. What started as Victoria's cruel joke had transformed into a genuine, meaningful conversation about work, dignity, and the paths people take through life. Her guests, most of whom had never spoken to a janitor or really thought about working-class people, were seeing Robert as a real person with a real story. Patricia Montgomery, Victoria's best friend, quietly approached her. "Vic, you need to apologize. This is getting really bad." "Apologize?" Victoria hissed. "For what? For inviting him? He's fine. Everyone loves him now." "That's exactly why you need to apologize," Patricia insisted. "You tried to humiliate a good man for your own amusement. Everyone can see that now. If you don't make this right, your reputation is going to suffer." Victoria looked around at her guests, who were all engaged in animated conversation with Robert, barely paying attention to her anymore. Her own party in her own home, and she had become invisible. The irony wasn't lost on her. The party had been going for about 2 hours when the front door opened again. A latecomer rushed in looking flustered and apologetic. It was David Richardson, a successful lawyer who worked in the same building as Victoria. He was carrying his briefcase, clearly coming straight from the office where he had been working late on a case. "Victoria, I'm so sorry I'm late," David called out as he handed his coat to the attendant. "The Johnson case is driving me crazy. I was stuck at the office until—" His words trailed off as his eyes landed on Robert, who was standing in a group of people near the conservatory. David's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then complete shock. "Robert?" David said loudly, his voice carrying across the room. "What are you doing here? Don't you have the night shift tonight?" The conversations around the room died down once again. Guests who had been enjoying their champagne and appetizers turned to look. The string quartet, sensing another moment of tension, stopped playing. Robert turned to face David calmly. He had known this moment would eventually come. Someone from the office building would recognize him. He was prepared for it. "Hello, David," Robert said politely. "I was invited to the party, so I came." David walked closer, still looking confused. "But you're the janitor at our building, the night shift janitor." The revelation hung in the air like a bomb that had just detonated. Some of the newer arrivals who hadn't heard Victoria's earlier announcement now understood the full situation. The distinguished gentleman they had been admiring was indeed the janitor. But before anyone could react negatively, Donald Fletcher stepped forward. His large personality filled the space immediately. "Yes, we know. Robert works as a janitor. He's been very honest about that. He's also a former architect, a widower who sacrificed everything for his wife's medical care, and a father who raised his daughter to graduate college debt-free. He's probably the most impressive person at this party." David looked around at the faces of the other guests, trying to understand what had happened. "I'm confused. Victoria, didn't you—" "Don't," Patricia Montgomery interrupted sharply, shooting David a warning look. "Just don't." But David wasn't good at reading social cues. He continued, "I'm just surprised because I heard Victoria talking in the office earlier this week. She said she invited the janitor as a joke. She said it would be funny to see him." "David," Victoria practically shouted, her face turning bright red. That's enough. But the damage was done. The guests who had missed Victoria's earlier slip-up now understood the full context. She hadn't just made a thoughtless comment. She had planned this from the beginning. This was premeditated cruelty designed to humiliate a working man for her own entertainment. The mood in the room shifted dramatically. People who had been chatting pleasantly now stood in uncomfortable silence. Some guests exchanged disapproving looks. Others stared at Victoria with open disgust. Catherine Williams, the elderly woman who had befriended Robert earlier, shook her head sadly. "Victoria, I've known you since you were a child. Your mother would be ashamed of this behavior." Victoria felt the walls closing in. It wasn't like that. I just thought it would be interesting." "Interesting?" Linda Morrison, the interior designer, cut her off. "You thought it would be interesting to invite a hard-working man to your party with the intention of humiliating him in front of your wealthy friends. That's not interesting, Victoria. That's cruel." Gregory, the city planner, added quietly, "What makes this even worse is that Robert is actually someone worthy of respect. He designed buildings that are still studied today. He sacrificed his career for his family. He works an honest job with dignity. And you saw all of that as a joke?" Robert raised his hand gently, asking for attention. The room fell silent again, everyone turning to hear what he would say. Please, there's no need to continue this. Mrs. Ashford extended an invitation and I chose to accept it. Whatever her initial intentions were, I'm glad I came. I've had interesting conversations, met kind people, and reminded myself that I have nothing to be ashamed of. But she tried to humiliate you. Donald protested. She wanted you to be embarrassed. I know, Robert said calmly. I suspected as much from the beginning. But here's what Mrs. Ashford didn't understand. You can only be humiliated if you feel shame. And I feel no shame about who I am or the work I do. He turned to face Victoria directly. Mrs. Ashford, I clean your office building. I empty your trash, mop your floors, and make sure your workspace is clean and comfortable. That's not a joke. That's a service. It's honest work that contributes to your quality of life, even if you don't think about it. Victoria couldn't meet his eyes. She stared at the floor, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Robert continued, his voice gentle but firm. The truth is, every person you meet has a story. The waiter serving your champagne might be working 3 jobs to support his family. The valet parking your car might be a student trying to pay for college. The janitor cleaning your office might be a former architect who gave up everything for love. When you look down on people because of their jobs, you're not seeing them as human beings. You're missing their stories, their struggles, their dignity. The room was absolutely silent. Some of the guests had tears in their eyes. Even the catering staff, who had been moving discreetly through the room, had stopped to listen. I've worked as a janitor for 20 years, Robert went on. In that time, I've cleaned offices for lawyers, doctors, business executives, and people like you, Mrs. Ashford. Most of you walk past me like I'm invisible. Some of you have yelled at me when things weren't clean to your standards. A few of you, like David here, actually say good morning and treat me like a person. David looked embarrassed but nodded in acknowledgement. But here's what I've learned, Robert said. My worth as a human being doesn't depend on whether you see me or respect me. It comes from within. It comes from knowing I did my best for my family. It comes from raising a good daughter. It comes from treating others with kindness even when they don't treat me the same way. It comes from maintaining my dignity no matter what job I'm doing. Donald Fletcher was the first to break the silence. I told you earlier, but I'll say it again for everyone to hear. I started as a construction worker. I laid bricks in the hot sun for 10 years before I saved enough money to buy my first property. People looked down on me. They treated me like I was stupid or lazy, but I was neither. I was just a man trying to build a better life. Catherine Williams nodded. My late husband started as a janitor too. He cleaned office buildings while going to night school. Eventually, he became an accountant, then a financial advisor. By the time he retired, he was managing millions of dollars for clients. But he never forgot where he came from. He always said that cleaning floors taught him humility and hard work. A woman Robert hadn't spoken to yet stepped forward. She was younger, maybe in her 30s, wearing an elegant dress. I was a waitress for 7 years while building my business. People snapped their fingers at me, treated me like a servant, complained about everything. One man actually threw his drink at me because it wasn't cold enough. But I kept working, kept saving, and now I own 3 restaurants. I still remember every person who treated me badly. More guests started sharing their own stories or the stories of people they knew. Parents who worked multiple jobs. Grandparents who sacrificed everything for their children's education. Friends who took on humble work to achieve bigger dreams. The wealthy, privileged atmosphere of Victoria's party had transformed into something much more human and real. Patricia Montgomery, Victoria's best friend, finally spoke up. Vic, you need to apologize, not just for tonight, but for your attitude. This isn't who you used to be. Money and status have changed you, and not for the better. Victoria stood frozen, overwhelmed by the judgment of her peers. She had thrown hundreds of parties over the years, always seeking to be the center of attention, always wanting to be remembered. Well, she would definitely be remembered now, but not as the sophisticated hostess with the best parties, as the cruel woman who tried to humiliate a janitor for entertainment. Slowly, Victoria walked toward Robert. Her designer heels clicked on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silent room. When she reached him, she looked up at his face. He wasn't angry or vengeful. He just looked at her with calm, patient eyes. I'm sorry, Victoria said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry for inviting you with bad intentions. I'm sorry for thinking your job made you less than me. I'm sorry for being cruel. Robert nodded slowly. I accept your apology. Why? Victoria asked, confused. After what I tried to do to you, why accept it so easily? Because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you, Robert explained. And because I believe people can change if they choose to. You made a mistake. A hurtful one. But you're human, and humans make mistakes. What matters now is what you learn from this. Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had expected Robert to be angry, to lash out, to make her feel even worse. Instead, he was showing her grace she didn't deserve. How do you stay so kind? Victoria asked. After everything you've been through, after how people treat you, how do you not become bitter? Robert thought for a moment before answering.